Yes, cool. Nice, good stuff. And also you can see the screen, right? All right, let's start. Cool. All right. Good morning, everyone. And today we will continue to talk about cryptography. And this lecture, we're going to talk asymmetric cryptography. So remember that during the past 3 lectures, we have talked about symmetric cryptography. We talked about DAS, we mentioned a little bit about AES. And starting from today, we're going to touch a new category of cryptography, which is asymmetric cryptography. And similar to symmetric cryptography, where most of the cryptosystems, asymmetric cryptosystems also achieve to encrypt information without requiring a encrypt information and to achieve security. But then, in addition to symmetric cryptosystem, asymmetric cryptosystem will be able to encrypt information without requiring a shared key. So it's like people are going to hold their different keys, but then they can use this pair of keys, which we call the public key and the private key. We can use this pair of keys to encrypt and decrypt message, and then establish a secure communication between 2 parties. So if just give me a second, let me just turn down my audio a little bit. I think this is a little bit too much. Hello, yes, okay, yeah. All right, so then for asymmetric cryptosystem, the way that it works is that every party will have 2 keys. So suppose that there's Alice and Bob, and they want to communicate with them between themselves. In this case, then there needs a key for Alice to encrypt the message so that Bob can decrypt it. And also, Bob needs to have a key that can encrypt the message that Alice can decrypt it. So it's like a single direction, I would say, in that way. So it's like if I want to talk to one secret to someone in secret, and I want to make sure that the other person will be able to decrypt the message and get the message that I want to send him or her, I need to use this guy's so-called public key to encrypt the message so that only this recipient will be able to decrypt it and get the plain text. So that's a little bit difference between, comparing to symmetric cryptosystem, because for symmetric cryptosystem, you just need a key, and then this 2 person, when they communicate, they can always just use this one shared key. But here you have to have 4 keys, which is 2 pairs of keys, 2 private key and 2 public key. And the public key is always used to encrypt message. And then the private key, which is the secret key that you will know, you should not just disclose it with anyone. For that secret key, for the private key, is the key that the recipient holds, and also use that to decrypt message. Okay? So I want to be very clear about the difference between public key and private key and their role in a secure communication. So basically, public key is for encryption, and private key is for decryption. Okay, good, awesome. Yep, and also this is a symmetric cryptosystem is also called public key cryptography. So in the future, if you see someone say there is a public cryptography where there's a public key cryptosystem that are used for communication, make sure that this is exactly what it means by a symmetric cryptosystem. People just use these 2 names interchangeably. Okay, so then let's talk about public key. So why do we want to use public key? What's the nice thing about public key? How they guarantee the security? Okay, so public key allows 2 stuff. One is confidentiality, meaning that if there is a message and someone encrypted, it's going to be hard for a third party or say an attacker eavesdropper, whatever, they can decrypt it. So it guarantees confidentiality. And also it will be able to allow non-repudiation, meaning that if someone gonna like use, say, public key crypto system to decrypt or encrypt the try to like process the message and then send it this like process the message to the outside, is he cannot deny that this message is sent from this particular person, like it's sent from the sender. So using public key property, it can also provide this non-repudiation nice property. And I will expand this to properties later on. So now you just need to have like a high level intuition about what is confidentiality and what is non-repudiation, okay? But then for public key, or say for asymmetric cryptography, it requires two stuff also. One is that it should be easy to generate a pair of keys for people to use, right? So in terms of like practice, how practical this can be used for real world scenarios, it is that you need to be able to generate the public key and secret key fairly easy so that people can use it. And also it needs to be guaranteed that even though that someone has the public key, like as I said, it's public so that everyone will have the public key, but given this public key, it's going to be very hard to infer the secret key. Because if that is inferable, then everyone will know about the secret key and everyone can also decrypt the message, including the attacker. So remember that the reason why it's called public key, as I said, it's like it's a key that's going to be public to everyone, right? So that everyone in this class, so suppose that I'm the sender and I give everyone a public key, that means that everyone in this classroom should be able to use this key to encrypt the message he wants to talk to me securely. But then I am the only person that can decrypt the message and get what you want to talk to me. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So suppose that if there's an attacker in the middle, he can get this encrypted message. He also has the public key because as it is public, he shouldn't be able to infer or compute the secret key easily because I don't want that guy to be able to decrypt this message. So that is the requirement for public key. And also it needs to guarantee that the people who hold the secret key can hold its security. Like he will not be able to leak this secret key to someone else. All right. And also, if two parties are going to communicate, like when I say communicate means like A talks to B, but also B talks to A as well. And if both parties need to communicate using asymmetric cryptography, then it needs to know PA and PP. Like both parties needs to know the public key of themselves and the other people. But also, as I mentioned, since it's public, everyone, including attacker, will be able to know about those public keys. All right. So now let's talk about confidentiality. Now we know like the setup. So it's like you have secret key, public key. Secret key is for yourself. Public key is for everyone, including the attacker. And under this setup, how can asymmetric cryptosystem guarantees confidentiality? Okay. So suppose that Alice wants to send a message to Bob. All right. So in this case, then Alice wants to encrypt the message using the public key of Bob, right? And then generate a ciphertext and send it to Bob. And then Bob is going to use his secret key, which I just denoted as of B, right? So Bob used his own secret key to decrypt the message and get a plain text. If there is a bad people, we call it Eve, like which who is eavesdropping between Alice and Bob, what can Eve receive? So first of all, Eve knows the public key, right? That is the setup of the asymmetric cryptosystem. And then Eve knows the encrypted message, like the C here, right? Which is also PB of M over here, right? Because that is, right? So Eve also knows PB of M, but then Eve doesn't have Bob's secret key, which is S of B, right? So Bob doesn't have that. And that's why Eve cannot know the plain text, right? Because only Bob can decrypt it. Okay, so that guarantees confidentiality. So far, so good? Good, okay. Let me continue. And then let's talk about non-repudiation, all right? So non-repudiation means that if someone sends a message out, he or she cannot deny that this message is truly sent from himself or herself, all right? So let's suppose that Alice wants to make a statement. So that Alice wants to tell everyone else a statement, F. And also, he wants everyone to know that this is truly from Alice. So that no one else can pretend that this is Alice, and also Alice can deny it, cannot deny it, all right? So in this case, then what Alice is gonna do is that Alice will use her own secret key to actually encrypt this message, okay? So Alice used his secret key to encrypt this message so that in this case, then the plain text will convert it to a ciphertext. We're going to just use M to denote the statement of add and a C to denote the ciphertext, the encrypted message. So then Alice is going to send this message to the audience. Everyone can receive it, including Bob. And then by the time that Bob receives it, Bob can use Alice's public key to process on this ciphertext so that Bob will get the plain text. So that in this case, Bob gets the statement back. So Bob knows what Alice is talking about. But in this case, Bob knows it. It doesn't mean that only Bob will know it, because everyone has A's public key, right? So that everyone in this classroom will get this message. And that's why this message is not guaranteed to be confidential. It's not that only Alice and Bob knows it. It's just like using this way, it can prove that this message only comes from, this message only comes from Alice, right? Because everyone's going to use Alice's public key to recover the previous message statement of M. And then as long as the statement of M is matched with this, process, like the decrypted message, it means that this is truly coming from Alice, because it is only Alice that has the secret key that can encrypt it at the beginning. Okay. And then now let's say that suppose there is, someone, an attacker, bad people called Eve. So if Eve is also, say, in this classroom, and he also be able to receive this message, what can he do? He can also do something like Bob. He can also get this message, right? So he knows this message. However, he cannot impersonate Alice, and also, Alice cannot deny it, because for Eve doesn't have the secret key of Alice. So Eve will not be able to generate C. So if it's sent from me and then if you get it, you will know that this is from the truly Alice. But then no other people can impersonate her. Good? All right, now let's continue. So now we talk about confidentiality and non-repudiation. And also, as I mentioned, these two are different things, and for non-repudiation scenario, it won't guarantee confidentiality because everyone knows about the actual message. Everyone can decrypt it, right? So then in this case, how can we have both confidentiality and non-repudiation in one communication? It also uses the public key and the private key that use a symmetric cryptosystem. Okay. So then, in a setup, so say putting this into the Alice-Bob communication scenario, this means that Alice wants to send a message M to Bob, but then also he wants to send this message in secret so that no one else will know about this secret message. Also, he wants Bob to make sure that this message is truly sent from Alice. No one else is impersonating. Or Alice cannot deny in the future that, oh, I didn't send this message. Okay. All right. So then in this case, what we could do is that Alice is going to use this two pair, like the two pairs of public key and private key all together. So remember that when we say when Alice and Bob communication, we will have two pairs of keys. One pair of like public key, secret key of Alice, and the other is public key and secret key of Bob. And in this case, what Alice can do is that she can first use her own secret key to encrypt the message. So you have SA of M, right? So that is a message that has been processed by Alice's secret key. And then Alice is going to use Bob's public key, meaning that in this case, then Alice wants to encrypt the message so that only Bob will be able to decrypt it. Okay? And then let's just denote it as C. And then this message is going to be sending to Bob. And then when Bob received this message, okay, and it's supposed that Bob knows that this is the way that Alice process the message. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you guys, if you're the Bob now, when you get this message C, what are you going to do? How can you process this message so that you can get those information? Yes. So you said that Bob will start with decrypting with Alice public key. So remember that here, the outmost layer is Bob's public key, right?
We're actually decrypting using Bob's secret key.
Yes, you're right. So, and also we have Mahmoud from Zoom also saying that. So first, you want to decrypt it with Bob's secret key, right? Because as I said, the outmost layer is Bob's public key, right? So you first decrypt it with Bob's secret key. And then you're going to decrypt again using Alice's public key, right? In that case, you should be able to get the message M. So how does this guarantee confidentiality? Why in this way that only Bob and Alice knows about this message?
Only Bob can decrypt the outer message.
Exactly, because only Bob can decrypt the message sent from Alice, because only Bob that has the secret key S of B, right? Okay, and how does this guarantee non-repudiation?
Bob can use Alice's public key to decrypt the inner message, and therefore he knows that Alice sent that message, because only she could use the secret key to encrypt.
Exactly. So after Bob decrypt this message using his secret key, then Bob can use like only Alice's public key to continue to decrypt it to get the true message. And then Bob knows that only Alice has the secret key that can send Bob this according message, so that they know that this is like it guarantees non-repudiation from Alice. Okay, cool. All right, so that is so far we just talked about on high level how an asymmetric crypto system guarantees confidentiality and non-repudiation. And now let's start to just look into the details. Given this fact, how we should really design a crypto system, or say how we should design an encryption and a decryption algorithm that can support asymmetric cryptography. And remember that we talked about those, requirements for symmetric cryptography. Basically, it should be easy to generate the secret key and public key. But whoever gets the public key, it should be very hard to recover to get the secret key. And when we design an asymmetric cryptography or an asymmetric cryptosystem, it needs to meet this requirement so that it can establish this security, confidentiality, and non-repudiation communication. All right. Okay, so there are a lot of examples. For example, people can use like RSA. I will talk about RSA later. So RSA is an algorithm, and also there is another called primary-shell cryptosystem, or you could use elliptic curve for to design algorithms that have these nice properties of P and S, like public key, secret key, easy to generate, but hard to infer from a public key. Okay. So now let's talk about RSA. Tell me if you have heard about RSA before or has been using RSA before. Good. Okay, yeah. We do have some students that know about RSA or use RSA before, which is good. So RSA is actually 3 letters from 3 cybersecurity researchers. It's Ron Rivets and Adi Shamar and Leonard Edelman, that they just like worked together and created RSA. And this is a general public key crypto system. But actually, before the release of RSA, it is believed that like 4 years ago, which is Click4Cox, already like created and implemented RSA. But then at that time, this is not a public, like it is a classified information. And then after that, some years later, the other 3 researchers, they just also find this RSA, but then they make it public. And that's why now we all know about RSA and we extensively use it as a public key crypto system. And then the way that RSA works is actually, I would say, fairly simple, especially if you compare it to DES or AES. Like you have many, many runs, and then you do this permutation, substitution, or FASL network, etc. The way that RSA works is that, suppose that we have encryption key, decryption key, and also remember that in the public key system, in the asymmetric crypto system notation, encryption key is the public key, and the decryption key is the private key, right? But here, just when we talk about the math, we're going to just use E and D to denote encryption key and the decryption key. And we have plain text, we have ciphertext. We're going to just use letter M for plain text message, right? And then you C for ciphertext. So the encryption is to have is to calculate M to the E, just like the exponential value, M to the E. So M is the plain text. And then we have the exponential value of M to the E and mold a big number of M. So it's very easy, mathematically speaking, it's fairly easy. And I will talk about what N is later. Right now, you can just know that N is a big number, okay? And then when we do decryption, it's also same way. But then instead of having M to the E, which is like using the plain text with the encryption key, you're gonna have the ciphertext to C, and then do C to the D, which D is the decryption key. So it's also fairly easy. It's like similar, or say very symmetric way to encrypt and decrypt. It's just a difference of what is the base and what is the exponential value here, okay? All right, so now let's talk about how this can happen. How can you just generate something that can satisfy this very beautiful mathematical encryption and decryption using the existing math knowledge? So the way that it works is that let's start with two big prime numbers, P and Q. So they're prime numbers, they're super large. And then you calculate N, like I just said before in previous slide, N is a big number. But actually more than that, N is a very large number. And also it is a multiplication of two prime numbers, P and Q. Okay, so you have N is equal to P times Q. And from the big number of N, you can get a pair of encryption key and a decryption key. And the way that you get it is that you want to calculate Euler's torsion function. You don't have to like know what does it really mean, but as long as you know this is the way that you can calculate Euler's torsion function, you're good. Okay, so this is the way that you can calculate the Euler function phi of n, and here it's just the reason why phi of n looks like this is because n is the multiplication of two big prime numbers, and in this way, because of that, the torsion function for n is the multiplication of p minus 1 and q minus 1. Okay, and actually, if you want to know the meaning of the torsion function, it's the number of values, that are smaller than n and is also co-prime with n. Actually, that's the meaning of Euler's torsion function. In the case, in this way, we have this torsion function, we have phi of n, and we want to find a pair of E and D such that the multiplication of ED mod phi of n is equal to 1. And then you're going to have this n and encryption key for public key. And then you're going to have this big number n again with the decryption key D as the private key. Okay, so this is the way that you can generate the encryption key and the decryption key, as well as the big number n. And as we mentioned before, you can use, like, given D, E, and N, you can use these three together to encrypt and decrypt messages. Okay. All right. So now let's just do some math together. First of all, I just write down all those equations that you will need just in case that you don't take a note, right? So basically you have E, D, N, three values. And then you can get the ciphertext by doing M to the E, and then you can get the plain text by doing C to the E, mod N. And the E and D are the two values which satisfy the condition that ED is, like E times D is equal to 1 mod phi of n. And also, let's remember that n is a big number and n is a multiplication of two prime numbers. All right. So now let's prove. Let's work together and then prove in this case that if you will have a plain text, so you suppose that the plain text is M, and then you encrypt it, so you get M to the E, right? And mod N, of course. But then now, if you want to decrypt it, which is to have the ciphertext and then decrypt it, so you have M to the E and then to the D. Let's prove that this is equal to the plain text mod N, meaning that if you have a plain text and you use this way to encrypt it, and then you also use the same way to decrypt it, you will recover your plain text. Okay, so let's work on this together to prove that if we are going to design this crypto system using those ways, like the way that we generate the key, the way that we decrypt and encrypt message, we can always just get back to the plain text. And you may want to use this theorem, which is Euler's theorem, that if n, a and n are co-prime positive numbers, then a of phi to the n is equal to 1 mod n. Oh, and here there's a typo. So here, this is small n, but actually, I mean the capital N. So here is equivalent to capital N. Okay, so you want to use this theorem to prove the correctness of RSA of this crypto system. All right. So I'm gonna just hold it for a while and have you guys work on this. And also, please just let me know if you already get it. So we have students from Zoom asking what phi means here. So that's Euler's torsion function. But actually, for the proof, you don't have to know exactly what it stands for. You can just consider that as a wild card. And as long as you have this Euler's theorem, you know that how to the property of this wild card, you should be able to prove it. All right, anyone get it? Yes, yes, good. I see some of your coming for guys, not your head. That's cool. I will give you 2 more minutes and then we can start to talk about the fancy of math. Okay, I am going to share my solution here, but I also need to make sure that you guys can see it. So this is just the same screen. And then I am going to put my equations here. I know that in the classroom, you should be able to see it, but I want to double check. So students from Zoom, can you see my LaTeX here? Good, awesome, thank you. Yeah, so let's work on this together. All right, I'm gonna retype it. Let's just first start with this part. So basically, you know, this is our goal, right? We want to prove that m to the e and then to the d again is equal to m mod n. And here, remember that n is the multiplication of 2 big prime numbers. All right. So let's start from this left-hand side of the equation. It is m to the e and then to the d. And the first thing that we can do is we can just get rid of the parentheses. We can have m to the e to the d is equal to m to the multiplication of e and d, right? Okay, and then we have this equation, right? We know that the multiplication of e and d is equal to 1 mod phi of n, right? So it means that if we have ed over phi of n, you will get the remainder 1. And of course, you will get a divider. So let's just rewrite ed to something that is related to phi of n. All right, so we have ed is equal to 1 plus some times of phi of n. K here is just like a number demonstrating that actually this is sometimes, you know, of n. So ed is 1 plus sometimes of phi of n. All right, so far so good. Cool. Okay, so now let's look at this. And then we can again make it to m times m of phi n times k. All right. I suppose that makes sense as well. Right? So this means that we just kind of separate this from the plus to like 2 numbers that are multiplied with each other. And I see questions from Zoom asking that, where did the k come from and why is that instead of 1 mod? Okay, so here I just put a random like I just put a value, like a random notation over there to denote that ED is, like ED is sometimes of sometimes of phi of n, and then +1. So here K demonstrates the time, like the time of the multiplication. Does it make sense? And then people ask you, why wouldn't it just be just one mode, m to the 1, I guess you mean like here, why is there the K over here, right? Why is it just, why you write them to just remove this K? And that's because when we have ED is equal to 1 mod phi of n, it doesn't mean that ED is directly equal to the sum of 1 and phi n. It means that ED is the sum of, 1 and then sometimes of time n. For example, we have like 5 is equal to 1 mod 2, right? It means that if we're going to have 5 over 2, you have the remainder of 1. But it doesn't mean that 5 is equal to 1 plus 2, right? So 5 is equal to some multiplication of 2 and then +1. All right, so that's why we put this K here to denote the multiplier. All right, so now let's continue. Now we look at this again, right? And then let's see if we can start to apply Euler's theorem. So Euler's theorem says that if A and N are co-prime positive numbers, then we have this, okay? So here we can make A as M, all right? And then we can have phi n, same here, phi n. So basically we plug in this part to Euler's theorem. And you may see that here, it says that A and N has to be co-prime, right? But then we don't have co-prime here. What if M is not a co-prime of N? And that's possible, right? Because we know that N is a big number and N is a multiplication of 2 prime number. So that's possible, right? But then think about this. If that is the case, then it means that your message has to be a multiplication of either number of P or number of Q, which is like 2 big prime numbers. So actually, if that is the case, then we can just replace M with something that is like a multiplication of P and Q. And that's like the entire equation should also work. But for now, let's just make it a little bit simpler. Let's say that right now, let's assume that M is not, M is co-prime with P and co-prime with Q. And that means that M is also co-prime with a letter of N, okay? And then in this case, according to Euler's theorem, we know that M to the N, M to the phi of N is equal to 1 mod N, right? So that we know, let me just make it a little bit more shapy. So we have this part. And all right. So this part, M to the phi of N is equal to 1 mod N, okay? So we have this part equal to 1, and then 1 to the K, that's still 1, right? And then multiply that with M, we should be able to get M. Okay. In this case, we can justify that if you have m to the e to the d, so it's like you have a message and then you encrypt it and then you decrypt it again, you will end up getting m again if you do m to the e to the d and then mode n. So you will be able to recover your plaintext from your ciphertext. Okay. So here, as I said, if m is not a coprime of n, then it means that m must be equal to a time of like p or q, right? And turns out that if you have that, you can also get the same thing as long as you put m is equal to like p times a multiplier. And you should be able to use the very similar way that you deduce it and you get the same message. And for the time, I'm not gonna go for that path, but you should be able to prove that by yourself. And if you can't, feel free to talk to me and I can show you in the offline. All right. Cool. Okay, now let's continue. So we just talked about how RSA work. We know that this is the way that RSA encrypt and decrypt messages. And now let's talk about confidentiality back again. We know that the goal is to get Q or get the plain message if someone has the secret key. But then, as we mentioned, a good asymmetric crypto system should make sure that it is going to be very hard to recover the secret key based on the public key. And RSA gives this guarantee by the fact that factoring P and Q from N is hard, or say it's computationally infeasible. And that's why we need a very big number for N. So that if you're going to factor N to find the P and Q from N, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very computationally expensive. Okay. But then, of course, this is just theoretically speaking. In the real world, you need to make sure that your P and Q, these two prime numbers, are selected large enough so that the multiplication of N is large, and also it's going to be very hard to brute force the prime number, so P and Q, in order to find this, find these two prime numbers. But also one thing that I want to mention, even though that you have a very large N, you can't always guarantee that P and Q is hard to factor if you didn't choose P and Q carefully. So for example, if you make one of P and Q, say P is equal to 3, okay? So if one is very small, and even though that the other one, the other Q, the other prime is extremely large, for the multiplication of N, it's still very large. But you can just easily recover P and Q by just trying this from the first prime, try from 2, try from 3, try from 5, etc. Right? So you really want to make sure that you are selecting the correct N, so that refactoring this is hard. And also, there are many ways that you could possibly attack the RSA in real world. There is websites having refactor, providing factoring solution. So if you just copy paste a prime number, or copy paste a random number over there and ask them to factor that to you, they may have already factored that before, so that you can just query from the database and give you the answer. So you don't want that to happen. So you also, as the people that want to defend the RSA, you want to make sure that your N is well selected so that it's not going to be very easy to crack. Okay, so that's all about RSA. Before I talk about next stuff, I just wonder if anyone has any questions at this point. All good? Okay. Yes.
There's a question on the Discord about the mod phi n or one mod phi n becoming mod phi n times k.
Oh, so it's back to here, right? So y is saying that y ed is equal to like 1 plus phi n and then times k.
Yeah, how that is equal to
K times phi n. Right. So this is by definition. So when I have ed is equal to 1 mod phi n, it means that if you have ed as the ed over phi n, you will have the remainder of 1, right? So if you have ed divided by phi of n, you will get the remainder of 1. So that means that if you have a random multiplier, or say ed can be represented as phi n times a multiplier, and then add the remainder, which is 1 in this case. So that's why I put a small k over there to represent the value of ed. Is it clear? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's all about RSA. And now let's just move on, move forward to talk about integrity of message. So we said that the asymmetric cryptography is great because it provides confidentiality and non-repudiation. So the question here is, can we also make a message can we also make a way that we process the message, like encryption or decryption, that can provide integrity, which means that if there is an attacker, and then if the attacker changes something, like changes the encrypted message, changes the ciphertext, from the recipient's perspective, even though the recipient received a manipulated ciphertext, he can tell that this text has been modified maliciously. Okay, so that is the so-called integrity. So you want to make sure that this message, once it's encrypted, the attacker will not be able to just change it and without any other people's awareness. Okay. So here, the question is how we can design something that can meet that if an attacker flips a bit, say, it can also do other modification, but here let's just assume that someone just flip a bit, right? For example, or say during the transmission, during the, say on the wire, during the communication, maybe there is a bit that is corrupted in the network, right? So if that happens, we hope that the receiver will be able to aware of the modification of the original message and how that can happen. Think about this. If we just use plain RSA, right? So we have a plain text and then we convert it to the ciphertext. And what if here someone just changed the value of the ciphertext and then forward that to the receiver? In this case, receiver can still decrypt the message using the ciphertext and then the explanation of ciphertext to the secret key, to the decryption key. However, the receiver will not be able to tell that this decrypted message is the same from the original sent message. He will get just another different decrypted message, right? So in this case, someone just hampered the message integrity. How to make message better? How to have this integrity nice property in message design? Turns out that we can use hash functions. I know that in our last week's guest lecture, Ni talks about hash function. And as I mentioned about hash function before when I talk about one-way function. So now let's just talk a little bit more about hash function. You should already know some of the hash function before, like MD5, SHA-256, especially that like when you download the software, sometimes they will give you this MD5 or SHA-256, so that you know that the software that you download is the right one. It's the non-manipulated one, right? So a cryptographic hash function should satisfy those properties. We're not going to cover how MD5 or how SHA-556 works, like how the algorithm worked before. Also, we're not going to talk about those like details of why this algorithm is designed in this way. But I just want to give you guys like a guideline of how or what kind of nice properties that those hash functions provides you. For example, we know that it should be a one-way function, right? Meaning that given the output, it's going to be hard for you to reverse it back and find the input. So it's like given a program, a binary, if you have the MD5 of this binary, you cannot recover the entire binary based on this MD5 number. Okay. And the second, it is deterministic. Means that every time you just run MD5 or SHA-256, as long as the input is constant, your output should always constant, right? And then the third is a small change will change this entire output. And you can just try that by yourself. Like if you just change a bit of a string or a string, and then you pass it to MD5, the output will be very different, will be entirely different. You cannot tell like if you change it a little bit or you change a lot of the input just based on comparing the output. And also, it should be very hard to find a collision, meaning that if you have a message or have the input and then you run the hash function, it should be very hard for you to find another value that will output the same hash function, like output the same value of the hash function. Okay. And also it should map arbitrary size to a fixed size. So it's like whenever the binary or whenever the program is, how big is this? It could be like 1 KB or it can be 1 gigabyte. But still, the output of the hash function should be the same because you don't want people to infer the size of your binary just based on the output of the hash function. All right. And this nice thing about cryptography hash function helps us for integrity. So one example used for message integrity is that if we have Alice send a message to the Bob, what Alice can do is that Alice can hash the original message and then send this message to an outside. So let's suppose that Alice wants to make a public statement. So he doesn't care that the app is confidential. Basically, he just wants to send a message to the outside. For example, I want to send a message to everyone that's saying that the next week's class is going to be canceled. I mean, this is just an example. You still want to come next week, but just like, it's an example. So suppose that I want to announce that next week's class is canceled. I want everyone knows. It's okay that the attacker knows about that too, but I don't want the attacker to change the sentence. I don't want the attacker to change it to the way that, okay, all the classes starting from next week is going to be canceled, right? I don't want it to be changed in this way. So what I could do is I will first hash this message. So I will have a fixed string that is one will map with my message. Okay. And then I'm going to use my secret key to encrypt this message. And I will call this like SA of the hash of M as sig of M. Okay, so it's like sending a signature of this message. And then I'm gonna release the message to the outside so everyone knows about this public message as well as this signature of message. Okay, so now I have a question for you guys. Suppose that you are Bob, or suppose that now as a student, you receive a message telling about next week's cancellation, And you have the signature of this, this message. And the signature is defined in this way, like SA of hash of M. How are you gonna validate this message? How are you gonna use this, signature of message to validate that this message has never been changed? Yes.
You'll decrypt the hash using the public key,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll hash the message yourself and compare the hash.
Exactly, exactly. So you're gonna first use the public key to decrypt the message, right? And then you will do the same hash because you already have this this public message, and you know the algorithm of the hash, so that you can prove that the signature, like after decryption, the hash of M is same as the way that you calculate the hash by yourself, right? Cool. Okay. And then next question is, what if someone like Steve changes this message from M to M prime? As a Bob, how can you tell that this message has been changed? So similarly, what you could do is, if you already have this M prime, which is changed by an attacker, you calculate the hash function, and then you compare that with the message that you decrypt from the Alice encrypted message, right? And then you can compare that, and you will be able to know that whether or not this message has been changed. And also in this way, attacker cannot change this message and then make it like available, or make it validated, verifiable from the audience, because attacker doesn't have the secret key of Alice. So even though that attacker can have a new message, an altered message M prime, and even though that attacker can also calculate the hash function of the altered message M prime, the attacker doesn't have a secret key of A. So the attacker cannot generate the new signature of the altered message. All right. Okay. So that's one thing, like how to guarantee the integrity of a message. And another thing is that, recall, we have symmetric crypto system. We need to have a key that is going to be shared between two parties. And remember that I mentioned, we need to make sure that the key is shared in a secure way, so that even though there is an attacker, like eavesdropping those messages sitting in the middle, he will not be able to get the share key. And this is one of the challenging part for symmetric crypto system, right? So now we're going to talk about one way that we can do key exchange. Okay, and also this is actually more than just the symmetric cryptography. You also want to make sure that, by the way, that you release your public key to everyone. Those public key is also secure in the sense that like no one else can change it. But that is actually called like a public key security thing. I will also talk about that later. And then back to key exchange. But think about, like, if someone wants to generate a secret key, but then he cannot generate a secret key by himself. He wants to hopefully like generate a secret key from another party who has a more powerful computing power, and then that party will give you a secret key. You also want to make sure that the secret key can be shared in a secure way. Basically, you just don't want other people to know, or say you want only the people that you want them to know about your particular secure key. And this comes with the Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm. So it provides a very interesting and nice way that two parties can share a key, but without disclosing like any information in the middle that can recover the entire key. And the high-level intuitive, or say the high-level intuition is that when two parties want to generate or share the key, they're going to work on this shared key together. Like one party is going to responsible for 1/2 of the generation of the key. And then during the communication, they only share their own half, like the other half but with some, with some processing, like a processed path of their key. And then if there is an attacker sitting in the middle, even though that he is able to eavesdrop all the messages, he still cannot recover the actual shared key based on those communication. All right. So this sounds pretty magic, but I will talk about that, like the detailed algorithm now, so that you will get why this happens. And actually, I think this is quite amazing. So suppose that we have two people, again, Alice and Bob. We have been mentioning them for many times in our class. So suppose that they want to share the key. All right. So at the beginning, they need to agree to two numbers. We call like two prime numbers, basically. One is P and the other is G. And this is going to be used later. Okay, right now I'm just going to put it over here. And I'll just use an example to show you how this works. And then Alice has a secret, which is a secret number that's going to be used as the key. And then also Bob also has a secret. Again, like these two secrets, they're not going to tell each other or send the secret to the other person right away. Because now we're assuming that there is a bad people sitting in the middle, they can eavesdrop all the messages. So Alice won't just send 4 to Bob, and Bob will not just send 3 to Alice. Because in that case, if attackers get it, attacker can get the entire secret key. So instead of sending A and B, like those secrets, what Alice is gonna do is that, or what Bob is gonna do is that they're gonna send like G to the A, like send the exponential value mode P on the wire to the other party. And it is known that if someone wants to infer the value from like, this is called like exponential logarithm modular equation, it's going to be very hard for them to recover that, to infer that. All right. So in this case, if Alice is going to send, like G to the A mod P, and given that A is the message, and even though that attacker knows about this entire value and knows about G and knows about P, those public message, the attacker will still not be able to calculate A, or say it's going to be computationally infeasible for this guy to recover A, given this A, big A, and also the G and P, those values. All right. And then similarly, Bob can also send the secret key in this way. So, but then for Alice and Bob, although they don't know the exact secret value from the other party, they can calculate the ultimate secret value using the way that to like having this value to exponential, like put that to combine with the his own secret key and calculate the exponential value. So here in this case, suppose Alice receive a B, right? And then what Alice can do is in the offline, he can have B to the A mod P, because she herself knows about A, so that she can calculate B to the A, right? And then she can get this secret value. And similarly, Bob can also use his own secret value P to compute the exponential value. And Bob will be able to get the final secret key. So see that in this case, both Alice and Bob knows about the secret key. But as an attacker who's sitting in the middle, he gets those exponential value, but he cannot really recover this final secret key because he will not be able to reverse it or infer the actual A and B from these two equations. Okay, So this is the so-called Beefy-Hellman key exchange. It is really amazing because like it's turning something, for me, I just feel that it's turning something from impossible to possible. Like you just share something, share a secret without telling the other people the full picture, but then they can still share and get something in common. And even though there's someone sitting in the middle, try to get like the piece of the information, he himself cannot put these two pieces of information together to get a whole picture. All right. And then the last one that I want to talk about is about public key. You know, previously I just asked you this question. If I have a public key and I want to distribute this public key to everyone in this classroom, how can I make sure that the public key that I sent to you is 100% correct? Or say, how can I guarantee that you get the correct public key of me, right? Suppose that, you know, there is Eve that can manipulate the public key or manipulate the communication when I send the public key to you.
It will depend on how you send it.
Sorry, say again?
It will depend on how you send it.
Exactly, it depends on how you send it. Or maybe you could do is you can start from Beefy-Hellman, setting up a shared key, and then send that key from using an encryption, but then that can be pretty expensive, right? But I mean, of course, there are other ways that you can send it.
Burn a CD.
Sorry, say again?
Burning the CD.
Burn a CD, but what if attacker just have the CD and try to, you know, punch on it and also change the value by maybe broke it, right? So that in that.
Wrong, not the CD wrong. CD wrong.
Yep.
You read those ones.
Okay, yes, it's wrong, right? That is like a hardware way that you can make this secure. What if I just can't give someone a CD? What if you guys just like in another country, so that it's going to be very hard for me to give you? I mean, of course I can mail you, but still there could be an issue. And one possible way to resolve that is the so-called PK1. It's called public key infrastructure. So the way that it works is that now I cannot guarantee this, right? Then let's now find a third party. Find someone that can authenticate me and find someone that everyone can trust, right? So that in this case, if I'm going to talk with a CA, so-called certificate authority, you can get the correct public key from me. And in this case, like we have a third party that can in charge of all those secret and public keys and to make sure that this is truly from me, not from someone else. And then also the public key that the user gets is the right one from me. It's not like something that is manipulated. All right. And then turns out that PKI has been used, you know, very extensively in our daily practice. For example, if you look at our website or Adam's or my personal website or like ASU's website, you will see this small like lock icon over there, right? And that means that you are using an HTTP communication, and that actually uses PKY, that which is the public key security integrity stuff. And also in our class, you may have an interesting like key signing party later that you will authenticate other people's public key. So you're going to make sure that they're truly from the right person. However, you also want to think about how can you really tell that the right person is the right person? All right. Okay, so I'm going to leave it for now and just please hold for the key signing party later on. Thank you guys.